Hello, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something I'm absolutely pumped about. We are literally decoding the DNA of successful founders. If you've ever looked at a massive enterprise or a thriving startup and thought, how exactly did they build that from scratch? Well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to strip away the mystery and dive into the academic frameworks and proven structures that actually define entrepreneurship development. So, it's the classic question, right? Are great entrepreneurs born with some sort of magic gene, or are they made? We tend to romanticize founders as these mythical visionaries who just woke up one day with all the perfect answers. But today we're challenging that myth head on. We're going to explore the reality that building a business, and more importantly, building the mindset required to run one, is actually rooted in a highly structured, totally learnable process. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll hit the entrepreneurial mindset, then look at 5 types of entrepreneurs, followed by the theories driving the founder. After that, we'll map out the entrepreneurial process and wrap up with developing core competencies. All right, let's dive right in. Kicking things off with Section 1, the entrepreneurial mindset, which goes way beyond just starting a business. Let's fundamentally redefine what we're talking about here, because it's so much more than just filing paperwork to launch a company. So entrepreneurship development, or ED, is actually a highly structured process. It's not just some dry corporate function, and it's definitely not an innate talent you either have or you don't. It's really about actively cultivating an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means training yourself to spot opportunities in the market. It means learning how to take calculated risks and knowing exactly how to manage your resources when you're facing absolute uncertainty. Basically, it's a vital toolkit that you build over time. Moving right along to Section 2, 5 types of entrepreneurs, or the faces of innovation. Let's see how this builds, because, as we know, founders are absolutely not a monolith. They actually fall into very distinct archetypes based on their motivations, their operational scale, and crucially, how they adopt new technology. There is such a fascinating and stark contrast in how different founders operate. On one side, you have the innovative entrepreneur. These are your tech pioneers, right? The ones aggressively driving massive economic shifts, introducing completely new products, or boldly entering uncharted markets. But then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have the drone entrepreneur. These folks are so incredibly stubborn and resistant to change that they outright refuse to adapt to new opportunities, even if staying exactly where they are literally means actively losing money. It's crazy, but it perfectly illustrates how a person's mindset completely dictates their day-to-day business reality. But hey, this spectrum goes a lot deeper than just innovators and drones. Take the imitative or adaptive entrepreneur, for example. They look at successful innovations, copy them, but cleverly adapt them. They actually play a huge role in developing economies because they're taking on way lower risk. Then you've got the Fabian entrepreneur. These guys are highly cautious, super skeptical, and they'll adopt change only when their absolute survival is threatened. And finally, we can't forget the social entrepreneur. They're using this entire business framework not primarily to make a massive profit, but to solve pressing societal, cultural, or environmental problems. Okay, into Section 3, theories driving the founder, where we explore the why. We've seen how these different archetypes act, but let's shift gears and look at the psychological, economic, and cultural engines that actually drive people to take such a massive leap in the first place. Decades of academic research basically boil down into 3 distinct drivers here. Economists like Schumpeter and Knight, they're looking closely at market disruption and risk-bearing. Then you have psychologists like McClelland and Hagen, who are digging into internal human drive and those deep-seated social dynamics. And meanwhile, sociologists like Max Weber famously linked the whole rise of entrepreneurship to religious value systems, specifically the Protestant ethic, which culturally encouraged relentless hard work and material success. Honestly, it is absolutely fascinating how these entirely different academic lenses are all trying to explain the exact same phenomenon. To really see how vastly different these motivations can be, just compare Schumpeter and Hagen. Joseph Schumpeter viewed the founder as this economic innovator, bringing about what he called creative destruction, literally tearing down old markets by boldly introducing new combinations. But then, Everett Hagen looked at it from a completely different angle. His social change theory suggests that entrepreneurship is often triggered when a group experiences a sudden withdrawal of status respect. So they innovate to forcefully regain their standing in the community. Think about that. One is driven entirely by market opportunity, while the other is driven by pure pride and social survival. Let's zoom in on the psychological aspect for a second with David McClelland's theory. The crucial takeaway here is this concept of the need for achievement, or NA. McClellan proposed something pretty surprising, that many founders aren't actually driven primarily by the desire for massive financial wealth. Instead, they're intensely driven by this deep need for achievement. They crave personal responsibility, and even more importantly, they desperately want concrete, immediate feedback on their performance. And well, the free market gives them that exact, brutal, immediate feedback loop every single day. All right, Section 4, the entrepreneurial process, your playbook from blank slate to enterprise. This is where we transition from the theoretical motivations we just talked about into the highly tangible, actionable steps of the actual business lifecycle. The journey from a totally blank slate to a functioning enterprise is really just a highly logical, multi-stage process. Step 1, that's discovery and ideation, identifying that one unexploited market gap. Step 2 is taking that raw idea and translating it into a comprehensive business plan, literally mapping out feasibility and daily operations. Step 3 is resourcing, going out and acquiring the capital, the talent, and the technology you need. And finally, step 4 is executing, managing, and growing that enterprise day to day. See, it completely demystifies the magic. It's not a superpower. It's simply a sequence of well-executed steps. And that brings us to Section 5, developing core competencies, or as I like to call it, building the muscle. Honestly, I think this is the most empowering part of this entire explainer. Because if the process is just a series of logical steps, that means the skills required to execute them can absolutely be systematically developed. So here are the core competencies every founder really needs. First, opportunity recognition. That's that razor-sharp ability to spot unmet needs early on. Then there's persistence in problem solving, which basically means viewing your inevitable failures simply as learning data. You also need efficiency and quality orientation, which is just that continuous, restless drive for excellence. But I really want to draw your attention to calculated risk-taking. This is huge. True founders are not gamblers. They just aren't. They do not take blind leaps of faith. Instead, they systematically evaluate the pros and cons to take highly measured strategic risks. So how exactly do you build this muscle yourself? Well, since these entrepreneurial traits aren't just something you're born with, you can actively polish them. You can go through formal entrepreneurship development programs, or EDPs, which are great for building your core business acumen and legal awareness. You can also leverage mentorship and networking, literally learning directly from industry veterans so you can avoid those common, insanely costly pitfalls. And you can participate in behavioral simulation exercises. This means putting yourself into high-pressure role plays, case studies, and business games to rapidly level up your strategic thinking and negotiation skills. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We've seen today that the entrepreneurial mindset is definitely not some genetic lottery ticket. It is a highly structured discipline, it's driven by very diverse motivations, and it's built through targeted skill development. So knowing that every single one of these competencies can be learned, practiced, and ultimately mastered, I'll leave you with this one question. Opportunity is everywhere around you right now. Are you ready to recognize it? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.